Hi, welcome to The Final Stitch. I'm Natalie, and today we're going to be talking about machine quilting at home, specifically straight line quilting. Thanks so much for joining me today, and thank you so much for sending in all of the great questions. We've had quite a few about machine quilting, and Liz has some of those prepared for us, and I'm excited to jump in on this.
So one of the first questions that we've gotten about machine quilting is straight line quilting. Can I just straight line quilt on my machine at home without sending it to the long armor?
Yes, you absolutely can. And there's several ways to do straight line quilting. Straight line quilting is just quilting in straight lines. So you can do things like stitch in the ditch, or you could echo quilt, which just means that you're stitching next to a seam or around a shape. You can mark it off with soap or chalk or disappearing pens, anything like that. And so today we're going to show stitch in the ditch.
Perfect.
And probably a couple little echo quilting designs, and possibly we'll use some painter's tape to show you something interesting as well.
Okay. So what is stitch in the ditch? Stitch
in the ditch means that you stitch right along where your two pieces of fabrics come together, right in this seam. And that is technically called the ditch. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and stitch this inside section right here, trying to just keep right in line with that seam, and that will get us started on this project.
Okay.
Which is a really cute little wonky star that I love, by the way. I think it's
stars
just
are
adorable.
happy.
I'm going to needle up. And as you can see, obviously my quilt sandwich is already made, and we will chat about basting and sandwiching some other time. But you want to make sure that your top, your batting, and your backing all together before you get started.
Right.
And I'm just putting my needle down. I'm probably gonna roll the needle a little bit just to make sure that I've got it kind of right in the corner. All right, so I've got my needle right in the corner. I'm actually gonna put it down and get started that way. Make sure your thread is back and your bobbin's full and everything else is ready to go. So you're gonna go nice and slow, try and be nice and straight. You don't wanna yank on anything or pull anything. You just kinda wanna let the feed dogs pull it through and use your hands to guide.
Okay.
So that is what we're gonna do. And it is fairly simple, but also kind of difficult, because if you get like to one side or the other, it starts to look a little bit like you're off, which I did a little bit, but I think it's probably gonna be okay.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
I mean, it's a little project, it's mine, and I dare anybody to judge any piece of art. Just don't do it.
Right. So to keep it straight, you're not watching right at the needle, right? Are you watching where the needle's going, or are you kind of watching in front of the needle like you're driving a car?
I'm watching the needle and in front of the needle, trying to make sure and keep that line straight.
Cool.
I struggle to sew a straight line anyways, but
we all do.
I'm trying really hard to be slow and steady, and as soon as I get to the corner, I'm going to leave the needle down, and then I'm going to pivot.
Cool.
So
straight-ish.
Going nice and slow. I do have a tiny bit of my mom's like impatience gene, so it's difficult for me to sew slowly. Okay, so my needle's right in the corner. I had to make a tiny bit of an adjustment because I went just like a little bit over, but I think, I'm trying to take it easy and just not worry about it, because quilting's supposed to be fun.
Right?
Yep. I know there are quilters out there who are amazing at this kind of thing, and they just look so beautiful. It's a really quick and an easy thing to do at home.
And it takes practice, right? The first time you did this,
everything takes practice. Awesome. Yeah. Mom says, she has a thing she says where it's like, if you stitch an hour today, you're an hour better than you were yesterday. And I think that applies to machine quilting your projects.
Sure.
One thing that I think is really, really fun to do is just these single blocks where you can get a ton of practice in without having to make a giant quilt and then risk, it's not really a mistake, but you can make a lot of mistakes and not feel like you're obligated to finishing this huge quilt.
Right.
So I like to do pot holders or little wall hangings, minis for my sewing room, things like that, to get a lot of good practice in.
And it's good practice without a lot of gravity defying you as well.
Yes, yes, because even when you're sewing on binding, if the quilt is kind of hanging off the table, it can get really difficult to keep control over. Sometimes I have one of my kids help me. They just stand there and hold the quilt so it doesn't pull.
Gotta defy gravity.
Yeah.
So as you're going along, are you stitching really in that ditch, or are you stitching kind of around next to sort of?
I think I'm stitching right in the ditch.
Awesome.
There's a couple places that it goes just a little bit onto the print fabric, because especially here as I started out, I think I just wasn't as steady, but okay, so because my thread is white and my background is white, if I kind of keep my needle more on the white fabric than the printed fabric, it's gonna look a little bit cleaner.
It's gonna disappear more.
Yes, and so it'll, even if it's a little bit off, it's not gonna look like it's not in the ditch. It'll be the
It's not gonna show as much.
yeah, it's not gonna show as much.
It's not gonna show.
You got it. Sometimes I just lose my words.
Well, and there's times where you want your quilting to show, but stitch in the ditch, you would usually want it to disappear.
Right, you're trying to hide your stitches instead of making them like the
start.
focal point of your quilt. All right, real slow in the corner. This is the last side, and then we'll do some taping, I think.
And so you could do the same thing around the star that's in the center. You're
In
just
the
gonna
ditch?
pivot. You could pivot around those corners.
Yes, you
So
could.
you can pivot around shapes or seams and using stitch in the ditch, anywhere you have a ditch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think I'm just going to do a couple of little back stitches here just to kind of knot this, because this is the corner. All right, so that is all set. Just finished that up.
Okay, so that was easy. And
Yeah.
you can go around any kind of shape. So you can go around the star, you could go around a little house, you can go around whatever shape is on there.
Yes.
So you mentioned taping. And I know that's one of the easy ways to mark that's repositionable. So,
It is good.
because if you mark with a pen, obviously you got to take it off again. If you mark with something that's going to leave a mark, even if it washes away,
Yeah.
tape is repositionable, so it's maybe the easiest way to start.
It is a great way to start, and we like to use painter's tape because it doesn't leave sticky residue behind.
Awesome.
And I'm going to put it so that the beginning of the edge is within the width of the other side, so that I don't have to worry about getting a super straight corner there.
Snazzy.
And then this we will lay down right here, and we'll go just about to there, and I'm going to give it a little rip. Super easy. And like you said, totally repositionable.
Nice.
So we'll line that right up like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And I'm also, I'm going to be stitching out here, so I'm not super concerned with this corner, but you may get into that, and it's just something you would want to either use the side of the other piece of tape for your straight edge, or you could use a little a pair of scissors to cut a nice clean edge.
Okay. Good tip.
I'm just going to tape another inner corner, because then we'll have like an echo right around the inner border, or where, inside the bordered edge.
Right. I'm kind of creating an inner border with stitching.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's really fun too, because with painter's tape you can create a lot of very interesting designs. Just because they're straight lines, it's going to be completely even. You can do grids, diagonal grids, straight grids,
Sky's the limit.
Totally. There's a lot of really fun things.
Painter's tape will help you out.
Yes. Yep.
And like you said, it's not going to leave a residue, so you don't need to worry about how to wash it out of your quilt or
Nope.
accidentally ironing it in permanently or anything like that.
That's right.
And there are lots of great tools, and we will
quick.
talk about those someday because those tools are great for their own purposes. But today we're just going to hit the easy one.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Today we're just going to do this quick little painter's tape, and I'm just going to stitch right along the edge, same as the last one. Starting here in the corner, I'm going to put my needle down and find exactly that little corner. And I'm not sewing on the tape, I'm sewing next to it because I'm going to pretend that that's the ditch.
Perfect.
So I'll use that edge as my guideline and stay as straight as I can. But I think if you sew on tape, it still peels off really easily.
Exactly.
It might be, you might have to use your little fingernail or something to scrape it out, but it's not going to be not a big deal.
Right.
So.
But again, you'll try to veer into the white if you are wobbly because it'll hide it. Okay.
I'm going to try and stay to that side for sure.
Cool.
All right.
I was going to say after the
and
races,
you can use you can use a walking foot if you want, but for projects like this, I find just a normal foot works great.
Okay.
It's not so many layers. It's not a super big project, so we're just going to go right along the edge of the tape with our regular foot, our regular needle. We haven't changed tension, and we haven't dropped our feed dogs. Everything on the machine is just the way you use it when you set it up.
Okay, same as
So
piecing.
there's a lot of different reasons why you would do all those other things when you're home quilting, but for straight line, it's about as easy as it gets.
Okay.
Last side. Put in a little tack stitch. All right.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! So now we can pull this tape off, and you can see that I've got, yes, it's so rewarding to peel back painter's tape, isn't it? I love it. But look at how cool that looks. So now I have this really neat little inner stitch that is just so straight. Like
it's a very tidy little border.
Really nice. And I didn't have to measure. I just laid down the tape and it looks great. And we'll just clip these little threads with our snips. You can tie a knot in it if you want to, but I did some back stitching, so I think I'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there you go. Looks
Awesome.
so good. So we could do the same thing. We could tape off the middle and do a stitch in the ditch with an echo inside. That would be kind of cool. We could also go around the edges of these star points.
Yep. All kinds of things. So next we have a question about how to take that a step further into grids.
Okay, great. Well, I have the perfect quilt and we'll show you in just a sec.
Okay.
All right, so we have this quilt. It's a little bit bigger and it's going to be really fun. So what I would like to do is create some grids on this quilt using painter's tape. And so we have this line right here that we'll stitch in the ditch all the way along. And we're going to stay inside the border because we want to do something fun with the border later. But for right now, we're going to stitch in this stitch, and then we want to stitch in this stitch, but if in this space is, it's where the on-point blocks come together, so there's no more line to follow. So what I'm going to do is actually put a piece of painter's tape, and if you wanted to, you could just stretch it from here to here, but I'm going to go the length because I'm going to sew a long continuous line. And so that is going to work out really great because then I'm actually going to go all the way out to that edge and go over the bordered edge just a little bit, even though I'm not going to sew in that spot. So I'm going along this side wait, I'm gonna scoot it over because I want to stitch on the other side because I am right-handed.
Okay.
So,
Yay for repositionable.
yes, totally repositionable. I just realized it's gonna be a lot easier for me to stitch it that direction. And I love that I'm able to like adjust it as I go and go out past the border and just let that sit right there. Now, you can tape off as much as you want at a time. I would probably try to do most of it before I got started quilting, just because I like to do my things in those kinds of steps. So I'm gonna lay down at least a couple more pieces of tape, if that's all right. I'm gonna do this one.
And it's interesting that you said, because you're going to stitch on that side of the line.
Yeah, so
Yep.
I'm stitching on this side. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you were going to flip and stitch from the other side.
Then you could position the tape on the opposite side of the seam.
Exactly. Cool.
So knowing what side is comfortable for you is what you would need to know.
Yep.
I'm gonna do the same thing in between these two because the point is to do, basically you're doing a seam every 2 inches.
Mm-hmm.
And this line doesn't need to be taped because it already exists. And then this line, I'm gonna stick with my same side that I'm stitching on here. And continue to lay that down. And keep my quilt straight and flat. Sometimes, I don't know if anybody else has this problem, but sometimes that basting isn't as sticky as you'd want it to be.
That's true.
It does.
And speaking of, we've seen a couple questions about basting. Let us know what questions you have about basting, so in a future episode we can tackle basting your quilt.
At least a few things. I think there's probably so many different ways to do it that
Lots
it's going
of
to take
ways.
us several tries to get through.
I think you are right.
Even most of the things.
So keep asking your questions in those comments, and thank you so much for commenting and asking your questions. It's helping us with
It absolutely keeps us going.
creating the right projects to show answers.
All right, so I essentially have half the quilt taped off. I think I'm going to go ahead and start in the middle and work out, and then we can flip and do the other side. So I think that's it. The other thing we can do is once these lines are done, then we can do the lines going in the opposite direction.
then
And
it
you
has
would
a
do the
cool
same
cross
thing.
hatch.
You don't necessarily want to put them down right
Before you
now,
quilt.
although you can, but you'd be sewing through tape at that point. But I would go ahead, stitch these lines, I'll stitch the ones on the other side, and then I would do the same taping method after removing this tape on top of the seams.
Going the other direction.
And that will make a really cool crisscross stitch
Beautiful
quilt
grid.
pattern. Yeah,
Awesome.
so that's how we do that.
Okay.
All right, here we go. I'm going to roll this in just a tiny bit because it has to fit in the throat. So it's pretty loose. I don't want to go like super tight rolls because then it might detach a little from the,
Right.
but it does have, and it also has to be flat to get underneath the presser foot. So getting it in just a little bit
And this is the thing too.
and
is
then
you can,
adjusting a little bit.
you can scrunch it. It doesn't have to be a nice, perfect
Right.
Swiss cake roll.
Right. Pull it all the way down to the end. And then I'm dropping my needle right in the little space where the tape meets the border.
Okay.
So, got to get that lined up. Drop my presser foot. Pull that thread backwards. Pulling your thread back from the needle helps your needle stay threaded, and the thread then doesn't get like caught in your seam. It can get a little messy if you don't pull it back, so it's just
Good practice.
it's how I try to start. And I'm just a hair, there we go. All right, so I'm sewing again. It's almost an in the ditch style right next to the tape, sticking to the white side because it's gonna hide a little bit better. Got to make sure and be really careful here at the squares, but feel like it's gonna be just fine.
And in the grand scheme of things, if it messes up enough that it really bothers you, you can take it out a little bit. You don't have to take out the whole row of stitches. You can just take out the little piece that bothers you.
The part that you don't like and just go back over it.
But for the most part, you can just quilt it. Nobody's going to give the quilt back because a little bit of white thread is on the red square.
If they do, they don't deserve it.
Yep.
I don't think anybody would even notice though. Okay. And the other thing I see you doing is smoothing the fabric as you go so that it's nice and flat on the bed of your machine. Yeah, that's helping me to make sure that I don't feel wrinkles in any part of the quilt. So I'm trying to feel kind of through the whole thing to make sure like the back's not super scrunchy, and you can test it from time to time, but feeling it from the top, if it's smooth, then you pretty much know that you're going to be okay.
A lot of quilting is by touch.
Yeah, and feel. It's like cooking, you know?
Yeah.
You like make it so the sauce looks like this, and you're like, well, I don't know what that looks like. So you just have to practice a whole bunch and figure out what works for you. It's like rules, no rules. I kind of love that though, because there's not really a right or wrong way to do it. There's just me showing you how I do it, what works for me. And what works for you may be totally different, but is completely 100% valid.
Yep.
So,
Quilter's choice. This is just one nice, easy. Quilter's choice. This is just one nice, easy way to give it a try.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, so I've got to the edge, and I didn't stitch into my border. I just did a couple of little locking stitches, and because I taped it specifically to sew on this side, I'm just going to pull it back through and go back that same direction. If I had taped the whole thing, I might be able to flip and do kind of both sides out. You could do it that way as well if you wanted to, but because of the way I taped it this time, I'm just going to pull it back to the beginning and stitch back through, and I'll do that a few times until I'm at the edge.
This is another cool, like, if this is the way that works for your brain moment.
Yes, totally. And like so many different ways to do it. One of the things that I do know about quilting is that when you put a heavy, like a dense pattern on a quilt, it gets tighter. And when you do a looser pattern, it tends to be more like snuggly, like you can, I don't know, it's lighter. And a lot of people find that it's much more comfortable to snuggle up in a quilt that doesn't have a ton of heavy quilting in it. So it can be a preferred method for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. And also, guys, ask us questions about other kinds of quilting you'd like to see us try on the home machine.
Sure.
Straight line quilting like this. There's a couple of other methods we can show you in the future too, but tell us what you want to see and how you want to finish your quilts at home.
There's almost as many ways to finish a quilt as there are to make a quilt.
I think you're right. And as many ideas as there are quilters.
Yep. All right.
So you would just keep going until you had the whole...
Yep, all the way out
all
to
the way out,
edge.
and then you could flip it.
Yeah, and we can remove a couple of these pieces of tape just so you can see what we've done.
Yes.
Pretty easily.
Love that seam. The reveal.
So you can see that seam nice and straight, and then this one And actually, you could probably just reuse these pieces of tape. You could just take this now and stick it right along there.
Yep.
You know, I mean, obviously I would stretch that out, but you can, because this is reusable, you can reuse the whole thing, use it twice and not run out of tape as quickly.
That's fabulous. You're right.
So, but it is a great, here's the stitches right here.
Yeah.
They go nice and straight right through it, and you can hardly see it. I got a little off there, but oh well.
No one will notice if you don't point it out, right?
Oh well.
And that's probably because the tape was there.
I think I must have taped it that way, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well,
So what do you think? Pretty cool?
pretty cool. I think this answers the question. So this is one nice, easy way, actually two nice, easy ways to do straight line quilting at home. So you can stitch in the ditch and
Yes.
follow the seam itself and go nice and slow, or you can lay down a little bit of painter's tape, easily repositionable, and follow that just like you would if it were a ditch to stitch in.
Definitely. So thanks so much for joining me today. I have really enjoyed hearing from you guys and seeing what you're working on. Please continue to send us your questions and comments, and join me next time on The Final Stitch.